fighting to survive. Tonight at 8 on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on CBS News. I'm Lana Zach. We have two big stories that we're following for you. Here's what we know right now. Israel's defense minister says the war between Israel and Hamas has, quote, entered a new phase. Rescue crews on the ground say Israel's latest strikes on Gaza have destroyed hundreds of buildings. Meantime, the humanitarian crisis is only getting worse in Gaza. Hamas says internet and cell phone service has been completely cut off. And here in the United States, the manhunt for the gunman who shot and killed 18 people in Maine is over. We have an update on the investigation, plus expert analysis, and we'll hear from the sister of one of the victims.
Somebody that got out last said, Trisha called. She called 911. She called 911, and that's how she got killed, because she was calling to save other people.
We begin now with Israel expanding its ground operations in Gaza. The Israeli military has begun sending heavily armored vehicles into Palestinian territory 3 weeks after Hamas launched its initial attack on Israeli civilians. As the tanks rolled into Gaza, the skies lit up from airstrikes. The extent of Israel's movement is still unclear, but two U.S. officials tell CBS News that this appears to be a rolling start to a ground invasion. Let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Rami Inocencio in southern Israel. Rami, tell us what you are seeing there near the Gaza border.
Lana, hi there. Yes, the intensity of Israel's strikes is absolutely increasing over the course of today. We were here yesterday, and the intensity of the artillery, the warplanes that we heard overhead, and the number of drones overhead has gone up. Now, if you look behind me right here, the Gaza Strip is less than a mile behind us, but you can't see any lights there. That's because, as you mentioned, the entire strip is still in a blackout. That's for electricity, but also for most communications. You might be able to make out a little red dot back there. That is a flare that went up several minutes ago, hanging in the sky, trying to light up potential targets for Israel's defense forces. But aside from that, there should be at least dots of light from houses, buildings here and there. A normal scene you might expect from any town on the border. But it is also so much more what you hear. When we were here earlier, you could hear almost every few minutes the boom of artillery. You could feel the boom through your feet and in your chest resonate here. But aside from that, it's also what we're not seeing. Over the past few weeks, we saw images of tanks gathering in columns around here. We're on the outskirts of the town of Sderot. Now, driving in over these past few days, we haven't seen any tanks whatsoever. We now, of course, have seen those tanks inside Gaza. In addition, this town here, Sderot, is pretty much a ghost town, a peacetime population of about 30,000 people, but now there's almost no one around except military and a few journalists.
And you are among them, Rami. We appreciate that and the danger that you're in. We still don't know, though, how expansive this operation could get. How is the military, the IDF, describing this move?
Sure. Well, Israel's military, as well as Israel's government, are really putting this through the lens of a fight for Israel's sheer survival and a fight for peace here for all Israelis. Now, that might be ironic to some by saying that, well, if they're waging this start to a rolling ground invasion, how can they call it that they're working for peace? But that is what they're saying. And now, today, they say they're moving on to the next phase of the war. The implication here, you just probably heard another boom from artillery going in. The next phase of the war, the implication here is that it will be an increase even further of intensity. The Army Chief of Staff confirms IDF forces are still on the ground in Gaza. They've already killed hundreds of Hamas fighters, including commanders. Earlier, we already learned that the IDF has killed the Hamas head of the Navy, as well as the Hamas head of the Air Force. But mostly, the objectives of this war require a ground operation. That's what the Army Chief of Staff is stressing. In effect, mentally preparing Israel and mentally preparing the world, really, for the longer haul.
And, Rami, we have to ask what this means for civilians and, in particular, American citizens living in Gaza.
Yeah. From what we understand, Lana, inside Gaza, we are not there, we cannot get in. From what we're seeing from the few reports that are coming out, chaos is the word. Total chaos, absolute chaos. The life of more than 2 million Palestinians, citizens, most of them, have been turned upside down. It's being described as a new, tragic kind of hell on earth. The pain and the suffering that we've been seeing over the past 3 weeks will likely only get worse. That is, unless, and right now that might be a big if, more aid is needed that is allowed into the country, and that people trying to flee the Gaza Strip will be able to be allowed out. But right now there's no sign that that's going to happen. One note, though, is that Israel did say that as this rolling ground operations continue, that they will increase the amount of aid, but there are no details to that, how much aid is needed, or whether they would be allowing people to leave the Gaza Strip. But more than 7,700 people we know today, according to the Ministry of Health, have died. We don't know in the past 24 hours how many people have died in the Gaza Strip because of Israel's assaults. But of course, without a doubt, that number will rise.
And even as you're saying that, Rami, we see those explosions behind you. Rami and Asensio, thank you. Internet and phone services were cut off to the more than 2 million Palestinians remaining in the Gaza Strip yesterday as Israel's attacks intensify there. Hundreds of Israeli forces are reportedly amassed along the Gaza border amid continuing airstrikes on the territory. It's not clear how many casualties the new airstrikes caused due to that information blackout, which has also cut off aid right now to the region. CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Patta joins us now. She is in Jerusalem. Deborah, what are you hearing out of Gaza today?
Everything that we are hearing, Lana, is bad news. It is a dire situation there. We've already seen over the past 3 weeks since that October the 7th attack the devastating costs for civilians living there, for children, for parents, and that is only increasing. Our CBS producer, who is in Gaza and has been reporting from inside Gaza since the very beginning 3 weeks ago, he tells us that there are hundreds of people streaming towards one of the hospitals that he visited, Al-Shifa, desperately looking for relatives, hoping against hope that they may find them there. People are also heading towards the hospital to seek shelter, to maybe stay there overnight because their home no longer exists. They have lost everything. You see entire neighborhoods that have been reduced to rubble, and sometimes entire families have been crushed beneath the ruins of those residential buildings. And what we're also seeing is the children. We're finding more and more children suffering devastating injuries, being taken to the hospitals, but they cannot be treated because everything is running out in Gaza. There is no fuel. It's very, very much in short supply. Water is running dry, and medicine, life-saving medicine, is running dry. And doctors say all they can do is provide words of comfort. And we're also seeing devastating images of children who are clinging on to the hope that their parents may be alive. So many of them have been orphaned. And of course, the blackout there is causing absolute panic, because normally after each bombardment or each raid, people would phone each other in Gaza to check that their relatives are okay. They can no longer do that with all communications having been cut off. Lana?
Deborah, I am still haunted by that father that you brought us and his 2-month-old baby that died previously, and now with communications cut off, no internet, no phone service, we don't even know the status of those types of stories. I'm wondering what all of this means then for the possibility of those hostages that are there and those negotiations, because we did see that there were at least some reports today that Hamas was saying that they were open to the possibility of an exchange. Can you tell us anything about what this next phase, as the IDF is calling it, means for those negotiations?
I think it's a very agonizing time for the families and the loved ones of those hostages. Hamas claims that already around 50 hostages have been killed in Israeli strikes. Now, we cannot independently verify that information, but we do know that the hostages are putting increased pressure on the government to do more. There are some who have even said they were not consulted about these raids and that now they're worried that their families may not come home alive. The Israel Defense Force has said they are going to destroy Hamas and also bring hostages home. And the families of many of those hostages seem to think that these are counter-opposed, that they work against each other, that the more the strikes increase, the greater the chances of something happening to their loved ones. Those negotiations do continue, but obviously it's a very difficult time with that blackout. The United Nations has said that they can't even reach their teams on the ground. There is no aid that is getting in right now, and they simply do not know what the current state is. So those negotiations may continue, but actually finding out more information and trying to assume that something is going to happen while this heavy bombardment is taking place is a very, very difficult one for those families who are just spending hours and hours of agonizing, waiting to get some kind of news. As we know, so far, only 4 of the 229 hostages that remain there now have actually been released.
All right, Deborah, thank you. Police in Maine have found the body of the gunman who killed 18 people in Wednesday night's mass shooting. In a press conference today, officials confirmed 40-year-old Robert Carr died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Police discovered his body in a trailer near a recycling plant where he previously worked. Now, that's about 8 miles from Lewiston, where he opened fire at a bowling alley and a bar. Officials say their investigation is ongoing.
We're going to be there probably through the end of the day, making sure that we process that particular scene. And we'll also be at the bar and grill and the bowling alley probably through the rest of the weekend.
CBS News Chief National Affairs and Justice Correspondent Jeff Pegues joins us now from Lisbon, Maine. And Jeff, we saw you there in the front row and heard you in that press conference asking about the timeline. What more have we learned today?
They're still working on that timeline, Lana, but they know, obviously, that the victim at the suspect, at some point ended up here behind me, just a mile or so away from where that car that was abandoned near the boat slip was found. So while there was all this concern that he may have left the area, he was here. The question is, how long was he here? And investigators are still looking into that at this hour, even though that intense manhunt has ended, and you can see this feeling of relief in this community. Even though the manhunt has ended, the search for this motive in this attack continues, because investigators obviously have a lot of questions to answer for the family members of the victims, 18 people, of course, who were killed in this massacre.
And I want to dig deeper into what you're saying about this, Jeff. That suspect found in the parking lot in the recycling business behind you. Police had cleared that business 2 days ago. Did they have any explanation for not finding him the first time?
And that's a good question. And what they told us is that they cleared it, but there were areas of this facility that they weren't aware of. And it wasn't until the owner of the facility came forward and said, hey, did you look in this area, that they went there, they checked it out, and that's where they found the gunman. And, you know, I'm not surprised to hear that, considering the amount of ground they've had to cover over the last couple of days. But finding him certainly brought that relief and took the edge off in this community that so many here were looking forward to feeling. That said, there's still a lot of healing to come in the days ahead. And so while the investigation continues, you're going to have vigils and you're going to start the funeral process and the remembrances in this community. The kinds of remembrances that we've seen in so many communities, unfortunately, across this country after incidents like this.
Those really beginning now that the lockdown orders have been lifted and people are no longer worried that he might still be out there trying to cause harm to people. Jeff, the commissioner also spoke at length about the questions about the gunman's mental health. What did he want the public to know?
Well, they're still looking into it. That is the question here that a lot of people are asking. Were there signs missed? Were his, should those guns have been taken away at some point, especially after military officials seemed to notice that he was acting erratically at a military training facility? Law enforcement did say today that, listen, there is no doubt that mental health was a major issue in his behavior. However, that still doesn't specifically answer the motive question. And with any type of investigation like this, you're going to want to find those answers for family members of the victims. So while they did talk about the mental health aspect and are looking into whether he was committed to a mental health facility at some point, that would have started this process of taking away his weapons, or at least seizing his weapons. So they're talking about that. They still have no firm answers, but that too is understandable. There's been a lot of focus on their part, first in taking the gunman off the streets, getting him neutralized. Now that that has happened, you're going to see more of a thorough investigation into the mental health aspect of this case, whether the gun laws in this state were efficient in sort of addressing this threat. But these are still a lot of questions that a lot of the questions that need to be answered over the next couple of days, weeks, and months.
Yeah, lots of questions still. It was also interesting to hear the commissioner make that distinction between somebody who's having a psychotic break and the vast array of mental health issues, and even pointing to police officers that have them, and how people shouldn't be painted with such a broad brush. Jeff Pegues, thank you for digging into all those questions for us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
The White House is weighing in on the developments in Gaza. When we come back, we'll dig into the Biden administration's balancing act, which pits the need for aid in Gaza against its support for Israel, a major U.S. ally. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
Well, let me start with this.
This really
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
Israel expanded its ground operations in Gaza this weekend as part of what its defense minister called a new stage in the war with Hamas. Israeli airstrikes bombarded Gaza overnight into today. The U.S. says it supports a humanitarian pause to allow in critical aid, but is not drawing any red lines for Israel. Natalie Brand spoke to John Kirby from the White House's National Security Council. She joins us now with more. Natalie, good to see you. So the U.S. supports a pause, they say, to allow in much-needed aid, but voted against having this pause codified at the UN. Tell us what all of this means and this balancing act that the Biden administration is trying to strike.
Hi, Lana. Good afternoon. And I should make clear that the White House has not said much since this ground activity in Gaza has expanded. But the administration has said that Israel has every right and responsibility to defend itself against Hamas and go after Hamas. And John Kirby told me that the U.S. is sharing tools and perspectives to help them do that. But at the same time, we know the administration, the U.S. is trying to help negotiate the release of hostages and also accelerate humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, which the White House has acknowledged is not happening fast enough. I also asked the National Security Council's John Kirby whether he's worried that an expansion of ground activity in Gaza could lead to a widening of the conflict in the region.
We have been worried about an escalation and widening of the conflict since the very early hours, which is why the president sent such strong signals to any other actor in the region, including Iran, that we don't want to see that. We have national security interests at play here, and we mean to protect and defend them. And that's also why he sent additional military capabilities, now including 2 carrier strike groups to the region.
We also know that the Pentagon put 2,000 troops on prepare to deploy orders. Our Pentagon team at CBS says that about 900 troops have been sent to the Middle East so far.
Yeah, I'm wondering, too, if you could tell us more about President Biden ramping up his responses to Arab concerns about Gaza. We know that the administration is trying to stop the war from escalating beyond the borders at this point, but has also engaged in targeted strikes in Syria. What can you tell us about this concern?
Well, the president has not spoken publicly since Wednesday, but earlier this week, he said that there has to be a vision for what comes next after this crisis. And he says in his view, that means a 2-state solution. He also called on Israel to do everything it can to minimize civilian casualties. And the Pentagon says that the defense secretary also underscored that message in a call with the Israeli defense minister. We know that the U.S. has sent a Marine general experienced in urban combat to advise Israelis. That's reporting from our David Martin. At the same time, as we've been talking about, the U.S. Is doing everything it can to prevent this conflict from widening and also send clear messages to actors in the region, such as Iran. You mentioned some targeted strikes in Syria. The Pentagon said that that was completely separate and distinct from what's going on between Israel and Hamas, but those strikes at 2 facilities in Syria linked to Iranian-backed militias were in response to a series of attacks against U.S. forces in the region, in Iraq and Syria, who were there or who are still there conducting operations related to ISIS. In those attacks, 20 since October 17th, around 21 U.S. service members suffered injuries. They're considered mild. They're now back on duty. But the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, calling these self-defense strikes aimed at sending a very clear message to Iran to stop these attacks.
Natalie, very quickly before we let you go, I hear it sounds like protests there outside of the White House. Is that regarding this issue?
It sounds like that is the case, and we know that they have been outside the White House in the past weeks, over the past 3 weeks, calling for a ceasefire. I can't exactly make out what they're saying today, but this has been a common occurrence, these demonstrations across the nation and right outside the White House.
All right, Natalie, thank you. We continue to follow developments out of Israel and Gaza. Ahead, we'll talk to a military expert about the challenges and what it could mean for this ground operation. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
Our story's just begun.
Why did you want to share your story?
Water up this high?
Where are these coming from?
That's the million-dollar question.
I'm a very curious person. I wake up every morning asking, what's happening in the world? Why is this happening? And how do we answer that question on the CBS Evening News?
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We aim every night to be factual and fair. That's our goal.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, and fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Since childhood, she never stopped reaching for the skies. Now she's spent more time in space than any other American.
I like being a part of something bigger than me.
Peggy Whitson's extraordinary career as a history-making astronaut when we go person to person.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se.
Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard?
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. What has to happen? That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. And that means a civil conversation with perspective.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Israel is continuing to expand its ground operations in Gaza, sending tanks and troops into Palestinian territory after launching a series of airstrikes Friday night. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now from Tel Aviv. Charlie, the IDF posted a message today urging civilians in northern Gaza and Gaza City to move south. Is that even possible?
The simple answer, Lana, is it's difficult, it's challenging, and in some cases it will be impossible for a number of reasons. You've seen this incredible inferno that unfolded last night in northern Gaza. That's going to make it dangerous and difficult for anybody who still remains in that area to get out. Additionally, there's no fuel. So for anybody to try to get their own transportation or even sort of buses or coaches or anything else, it's hard to get from point A to point B. And the roads are demolished too. So although there's been a re-warning, if you will, because it's been going on for a number of days where they've tried to encourage people to move from north to south. It is dangerous, it's difficult, and in some cases impossible because of the roads and the damage that's been done there. And we are talking, I know we keep talking about what it means, more than a population of more than 2 million people. I've been there. It is the most tightly congested and packed area that I've ever been to under normal circumstances. In the middle of a raging conflict and a war and the bombardment that it's seen, it's impossible to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, Gaza during peace times, quote unquote, have been a dire situation anyway. So I'm wondering, Charlie, if you can tell us if there's been any response from any neighboring countries to this new phase of the war.
Well, as you've seen, I'm sure there's been a sort of growing international condemnation looking for a ceasefire because of what many, especially regional countries, are seeing as a disproportionate reaction to what happened, just 3 weeks ago today. So they've been calling for ceasefires. They've been calling for restraint. Places like Egypt, Qatar, Jordan. The Israelis are aware of that. When you speak to people here in Tel Aviv, nobody wants a conflict to happen. They realize that they're dealing with an existential threat. And after what happened 3 weeks ago, the country is still in a state of shock. But nobody likes to see the images that they've been seeing. And they understand this growing international response to tone down or to have some sort of humanitarian ceasefire. But their primary goal, at least for the Israeli Defense Forces, is to destroy and dismantle Hamas, which remains a threat here. And until that objective is achieved, there's really been no kind of talk of a humanitarian ceasefire. What we have heard, by the way, is that there may be an opening through the areas that the Israeli military has already invaded or launched their incursions to, that there may be relief from that side. Of course, we're all waiting for more relief from Rafah, but in the middle of this conflict, it's been difficult even for those aid trucks to push through.
All right. Charlie D'Agata, thank you.
Thank you.
The expanded ground operations in Gaza presents new challenges for the IDF. The Gaza Strip, one of 2 major Palestinian territories, is, as you heard, a densely populated stretch of land that is home to more than 2 million people. Let's bring in CBS News contributor Robert Berger, who joins us now from Jerusalem. Robert, what could the timeline of this expanded ground operation look like? What are the challenges?
I think the biggest challenges are the Hamas tunnels and freeing the hostages. Now, Hamas has this huge tunnel network. It's said to be about 300 miles, a maze. And, Hamas basically has the advantage in that situation. The Israeli army calls this the metro, but Hamas knows the nooks and crannies, and they have hundreds of, probably thousands of fighters, heavily armed fighters in those tunnels. They're booby-trapped, and their infrastructure, their military infrastructure and headquarters are located in those tunnels. So, and then to make matters more complicated, there are 229 Israeli hostages. It's believed that most, if not all of them, are being held in those tunnels. So the question is, how does Israel attack those tunnels without harming the hostages? And that's the big dilemma Israel's facing.
Yeah, that is certainly part of this complex story. Robert, what's the mood like there in Jerusalem as we enter week 4 of this conflict?
The mood here in Jerusalem and really all over the country is somber. It was a huge casualty toll, the biggest terrorist attack in the state of Israel history back on October 7th, 1,400 killed. So everyone knows someone who either or directly or indirectly who was killed or has been taken hostage or who's been called up to the reserves or who has a relative in the army. So that's part of it. And then most things here in Jerusalem are closed. Most businesses, restaurants are mostly closed, places of entertainment. You really just have the vital businesses like supermarkets and pharmacies that are open, people staying close to home, a lot of people out of work. And Jerusalem is something of a ghost town. And then because of that huge casualty toll on October 7th, the sense of security among Israelis here in Jerusalem and all over the country has been eroded. I think people are wondering if anywhere in Israel is really safe.
All right. Robert Berger, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we are hearing from a survivor of the mass shooting in Maine who's opening up about losing her sister in the attack. After the break, our Arlene Quijano will share more of this emotional interview. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. These migrants, they've been released. Explain the status that allows them to be released, to slow things down a little bit. What are the big sets of questions for China and its ambitions? Hackers are stepping up their attacks to extort victims. Let's start with easy. Who's attacking? Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Prime Time with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is
that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
We take you places, teach you new things, and we make you feel like, it's not all bad. We're going to uplift you.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. I mean, you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
when weather turns extreme.
A massive storm with winds of 150 miles per hour.
The storm strengthened again overnight.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS News.
I wake up every morning asking what's happening in the world, why is this happening, and how do we answer that question? After the tragic loss of beloved newsman Tim Russert, his son went on a worldwide journey to find himself.
I struggled with his grief for a long time.
How Luke Russert is honoring the legacy of his father when we go person to person.
Maine police say that they have found the body of the gunman who killed 18 people in Wednesday night's mass shooting. They found 40-year-old Robert Card last night in a trailer near a recycling plant where he used to work. Joining us now is Mary Ellen O'Toole. She is a retired FBI special agent. Mary, based on your experience, did you expect the manhunt to end this way?
Yes, I did. And I say that because in these kinds of cases where there's the intent to carry out a mass homicide, one of the underlying motivations is very typically also suicide. It doesn't mean 100% in the end that's going to happen, but we've now had way too many cases over the last 20 plus years. So we know that how powerful suicidal ideation is in terms of being part of the motivator for these crimes.
And Mary Ellen, at the latest news conference today, an official said that police had looked for Card twice at the recycling center where he was found. Given what you're saying about the very big possibility that he would have committed suicide, but it seemed to have slipped by them. Is that surprising to you?
It really isn't, and I'll tell you why. Because police they really have to pursue two trajectories in a case like this. They absolutely have to pursue the possibility that he's not dead. And because there's such a threat to the public. And so they are searching and they're going back and looking in different locations, looking for someone who's alive. But the other trajectory is that they have to consider that there's suicide, which when you look at it, doesn't require that aggressive, reactive response. If the person is dead, they're not a threat to the public anymore. So they had to pursue both trajectories. They absolutely did not have a choice.
And investigators also confirmed the gunman left behind a note, but that it was mostly logistical, passwords, bank info. Based on your experience in the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, what does that tell you about his state of mind?
Well, it tells me that the note may have been more like a last will and testament, as opposed to a traditional suicide note where the person talks about their regrets or talks about how they were feeling, what actually led them to the suicide, says goodbye to loved ones. So this looks like a last will and a testament. So you ask me, what does that suggest? It suggests that he's in touch enough with reality to leave passwords for a loved one. So the real question in terms of the part of mental illness that played into this is, did this individual know right from wrong, and did he understand the consequences of his actions? And if he understood that a suicide would necessitate leaving password information behind to a loved one, that certainly suggests to me that he did understand the consequences of his actions.
Very interesting. Mary Ellen O'Toole, thank you.
You're welcome.
The families who lost loved ones Wednesday night are, of course, still grieving. Arlene Keano spoke to a woman who lost her sister, and she described the terrifying moments hiding from the shooter and the uncertainty that followed.
We're all crying, and we're like, there's a crazy man. I don't understand. Why is this happening? I don't get it. And I'm like, I want to know where my sister is. I want to know where she is. I want her out here. I couldn't see her.
Elaine is in Lewiston, Maine with more. She has been talking to victims' families, has been at the hospital. And Elaine, when we hear from Bobby Nichols about her experience losing her sister, it is so hard to absorb. What did she tell you about the time that she spent hiding from the gunman?
Yeah, so she was here at the bowling alley behind me with her sister, Trisha Aslin, and you heard her recount the sequence of events. They basically ran as far as they could, she and a crowd of other people, until a fence stopped them, right? At that point, she's looking around, says, that is the biggest tree, I'm going to hide behind that. But then this additional layer of terror set in as she looked around, and everyone was looking around saying, is the gunman here among us? Could the gunman have run out with us? Because the chaos and the confusion of the moment, it was unclear what was even really happening. And that is also the moment when she realized her sister Trisha was still inside.
Oh my gosh, Elaine, that image of hiding out in the darkness by a tree, and Nichols realizing her sister wasn't there, you actually asked her what she would say to her in this moment. I want to play for our viewers what she told you.
She really didn't want a lot of people to know how good she was. She didn't realize how many people loved her, how many people she had. So she would tell me, you don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm with Dad. I'm with Dad.
Oh, Elaine, how is this community, how is Bobby trying to move forward? How are they trying to heal?
Yeah, you know, Lana, I know you've covered these stories as well. Let me start with Bobby. So Bobby, when we sat down with her, was sharing all of the beautiful different ways that her sister was a generous spirit. She walked in a breast cancer walk, even though she herself never was struck with breast cancer. She did this not once, not twice, but many times. This was a regular thing, right? She was here on Wednesday night, not because she had to work, even though she was a part-time employee. It was her day off. She wanted to bring everyone together, including her sister, to just connect and enjoy, as so many people were enjoying and trying to enjoy on that Wednesday night. She told us, Bobby said, that Trisha was a huge Boston sports team fan. She would go down to Boston and watch her Bruins play, the hockey team. She would watch the Red Sox play. She would yell at the TV when she couldn't be there in person. But her generosity is something that now Bobby wants to carry on. How? With a sports scholarship in her sister's name. So it is a long, painful road ahead for Bobby and for this entire community as well. But Bobby, in her situation, is she told us that she is trying to think of how she's going to go ahead and move forward with this scholarship so that she can essentially bring her sister's spirit out to the world now that her sister isn't here. As for the larger community, they haven't been able to grieve collectively, right? That lockdown was in place for nearly 48 hours. And so even as this grief was happening, people were sheltering in place behind closed doors. They'll have an opportunity now this weekend to come together and express their grief and express it in a way that offers support to each other. So that is how, in this immediate moment, in the immediate aftermath, people are trying to come together.
And Elaine, how are people now responding there to the news that the shooter is dead?
You know, Bobby said to us, this was before news that his body had been found. We sat down with her last night and hadn't heard that news yet. She hadn't been notified yet. But she said anyway, this is not about the shooter. Yeah. For her, this is about her sister. For the families, this is about their loved ones, and that is where they're choosing to focus their attention.
Elaine, so appreciate you bringing us remembrances of these victims and that we can see them more fully as the people that they were. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The need for humanitarian aid in Gaza right now is dire. After the break, we'll talk to a specialist from Doctors Without Borders about what the situation's like on the ground and what is needed the most. We'll be right back.
Why did you want to share your story?
Water up this high? Where are these coming from?
That's the million-dollar question.
I'm a very curious person. I wake up every morning asking, what's happening in the world? Why is this happening? And how do we answer that question on the CBS Evening News?
An original documentary from CBS reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We aim every night to be factual and fair. That's our goal.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, and fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Since childhood, she never stopped reaching for the skies. Now she's spent more time in space than any other American.
I like being a part of something bigger than me.
Peggy Whitson's extraordinary career as a history-making astronaut when we go person to person.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se.
Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard?
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. What has to happen? That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. And that means a civil conversation with perspective.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
As the humanitarian crisis escalates in Gaza, doctors are on the ground working to provide life-saving medical care to the tens of thousands of people affected. Dr. Tanya Haj-Hassan joins us now with more from Jordan. She's a pediatric intensive care and humanitarian doctor for Doctors Without Borders. She's also a co-founder of the Gaza Medic Voices social platform. Dr. Haj-Hassan, thank you for being here. Talk to us about just how dire the medical crisis is in Gaza right now.
I think there are very few words to describe how dire it is at the moment. It's certainly the worst that I have experienced in my career as a humanitarian physician. You know, I was meant to be going to Gaza next week, and unfortunately, with the evolving situation, that has now been canceled, and no volunteers have been able to get in, with the exception of a very small team from ICRC a couple of days ago. And I think leading up until the situation, leading up until today or last night, we were already dealing with a situation that we were struggling to describe. That's one of the worst that, as I said, I have seen. And I just want to sort of set the stage a little bit. This is a population that's been living under siege for 16 years. We've been operating in Gaza for about 20 years as an organization. This is a population that's already suffocated and struggling to access basic needs of food, clean water, medical supplies, and healthcare. And the implications of the current intense bombardment, displacement, and complete cutoff of food, medicines, and fuel is catastrophic for the civilian population. And in terms of the healthcare system, 4 days ago, I think the Ministry of Health declared a complete collapse of the health system in Gaza. At that point, and things are much worse now, 1/3 of the hospitals were not functioning due to direct damage, due to lack of fuel and other supplies as well. And the remaining were functioning at less than bare minimum capacity due to the volume of injuries, lack of supplies and fuel. And like I said, this is against the backdrop of the healthcare system that was already strangulated. I had been in regular contact with colleagues there up until yesterday evening, when I lost contact with everybody that I know personally there. As you know, there's been a blackout, and it's been difficult, if not impossible, to communicate with people on the ground. And so we don't know what's happening at this exact moment. We do know that there are tens of thousands of people sheltering in and around the hospitals because of the mass displacement that's happened over the last 3 weeks. And we know that the physicians are working around the clock, the nurses are working around the clock, the paramedics are working around the clock. Unfortunately, with the recent cutoff of all communication within Gaza and between Gaza and the outside world, it does mean that we don't know what's happening. We don't know what areas are being targeted, and we fear the worst. And as an organization, as individuals, we are, as humanitarians, we want to emphasize that, one, hospitals are never a target, and we are particularly concerned for the patients and staff and thousands of families that are taking shelter in hospitals.
And Dr. Hutchison, we have heard from Doctors Without Borders calling for a ceasefire to try and deal with this humanitarian crisis that exists in Gaza. In the remaining moments that we have, I want to get your perspective as a healthcare professional who founded Gaza Medic Voices to try and help medical professionals communicate during the crisis that no longer can communicate because of that full communications blackout right now. What are medical professionals able to do if they don't have clean water, if they don't have generators? Will they be able to save lives?
You know, I'm a pediatric intensive care doctor, so I specialize in taking care of patients who are very, very sick and the most critical patients. And I will tell you that the effective way to save lives right now is an immediate ceasefire. And if you hear the resolve in my voice, it is because there's been a deafening international silence about this. This, unfortunately, and we know that the mass civilian casualties that have resulted in this are a stain on our collective humanity. And despite numerous calls from international organizations, from humanitarian organizations like Doctors Without Borders for an immediate ceasefire, that request has been ignored, has been turned down. And in the meantime, there are thousands of civilians who are dying. And we know that about 2/3 of those who've died in Gaza right now are women and children. And we are extremely concerned for the civilian population and for the amount of just death that could be prevented. In answer to the second part of your question, you mentioned what can doctors do to save lives. I mean, I'll give you an example of myself as a physician. As an intensive care physician, I need ventilators that run on electricity. Gaza has no fuel. Electricity was cut off 3 weeks ago, and the fuel is running out. There's very little fuel left that's operating the backup generators. Intensive care doctors need monitors. We can't use those with electricity. We need infusion pumps. We also need blood. There's not enough blood because of the number of injuries. 2-3 days ago, the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs stated there were over 17,000 people that were injured in Gaza. over 7,000 that had been killed, over 3,000 that were children, and over 1,000, close to 2,000 that aren't accounted for in those numbers because their bodies are still trapped under the rubble, over 900 of which are children. And a hospital needs enormous capacity, and now you're functioning with a fraction of the existing hospitals in Gaza. You're functioning in a situation where there's no access to clean water, there is no electricity, and we're running out of the fuel that's operating the few remaining generators. And I want to be clear, when that fuel runs out, every person on a ventilator, every baby, newborn premature baby on a ventilator in an incubator requiring life supporting therapy, every patient who's dependent on chronic dialysis for their kidney disease will die. It is a death sentence for all of these patients. And MSF, Doctors Without Borders, was founded over 50 years ago by a group of doctors and journalists to establish, essentially to focus on delivering emergency medicine and aid very quickly, effectively.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we have seen you. I'm sorry, the computer is going to take us someplace else. So I want to say thank you very much, Dr. Tanya Hodge-Hassan. Appreciate you coming and sharing your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is holding a press conference about those ground operations. We want to bring you coverage now from our partners at the BBC.
Crimes against humanity when they use their people as human shields. So many people around the world understand that Israel is fighting on behalf of the entire humankind. Our allies in the Western world and in the Arab world, that if we do not win, they will be next on the list of Hamas. Since the beginning of the war, there has been a coalition created. We have succeeded in it with Europe, President Biden, President Macron, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and so many others. They came during war times with a very clear message. We are hoping for your victory. Yes, it is good to stand together. And we would also hope and clarify there is one thing that we must do. Sometimes a nation has various options that it has to face. And I do not doubt how this will end. We will win. We will prevail. We are carrying out massive airstrikes in order to assist our ground forces as they go in. And we have used targeted killings and destroyed headquarters of the Hamas. This will be a long war. It is our second war of independence. We will fight and we will not surrender. We will not withdraw. Overground and underground. It will be a victory of the good over evil, because we are fighting for life, and we stand steadfast together, more united than ever. I pray on behalf of myself and all of us for the safety of our soldiers. And they will win, because we are together, and together it will prevail.
We have been listening to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Our coverage coming from our media partners at BBC News. We heard the Prime Minister say that this will be a long war. He called it our second war of independence, claiming that